What's up, Mom Nation? We are finally live again, Laura. Hey, Laura.
Hey. Hi, Katie.
I am so excited. I know it's been a couple of months that we were dealing with some technology stuff, and I finally got my crap together. And here we are live again, which I absolutely love, and I know the mamas appreciate too. So, welcome to the show, y'all, and welcome, Laura, our very favorite personal counselor. Different name for you every time.
That's okay. I think that works.
Our favorite personal counselor. Here she is.
Here I am.
All right. So as you guys know, what we do here is we talk about different topics, different things that we want to work through as parents, as women, as moms, so that we don't pass this stuff that we don't want to keep alive, right, on to our children and get them in the repetition of doing it and in the cycle of doing it, I should say. So we work on ourselves here so that our children don't have to get rid of our stuff later.
I love that. Intergenerational trauma, it is constant. It happens all the time. And it doesn't have to be the big T traumas. I think we often think of trauma as like this major event or this huge thing, but it's not. It's little stuff that goes unattended, and it's asking for help and not getting help, and it's feeling alone and feeling abandoned when you're a kid. And those things matter, and they make our adult brains might think they're little now, but when you're a kid, they're big stuff and they stick with you.
And shape you and shape your, what I like to call filters. So when information comes at us, we filter it a certain way, depending on how those filters are set, right? And what created that. And so I love that you said that, because even something that seems relatively minor in our adult lives with so much going on, it's big for kids.
Mm-hmm. It is, and we're literally wiring their brains as we go. So like you said, we're setting those filters. We're creating the groundwork for their brains for the rest of their lives, for better or worse. And so we really only have one chance to do that. And when they're little, it's the easiest to shift and correct. And when they're bigger, you can still do the work, and it's never too late, right? But it takes more work. So if we can catch it now and stop it in its tracks, then that is the best way to go.
Yes, ma'am. I love it. So let's talk about something that I have seen. I mean, it's just over and over and over again that I see posts about this and questions about this, whether it be specific situations, specific scenarios, or just the broader question. And that's when you find a different partner. So, whatever happened in the previous relationship happened, that's dissolved. We're moving on now. We're dating, right? Super fun to date as an adult, isn't it? Yeah, big no. Can be exciting, I suppose, but there's a bit of work involved, I've heard. It's been a little while since I've been in the dating scene, so I don't know. I have to hear it from the peoples.
Right.
But the big question is, hey, I have kids from a previous relationship. He or she may or may not have kids too. But when is it time to introduce my new partner to my kids? And how should I do that? Now, that can be a risky thing, right? I personally, and I know you have a little bit of experience with this too, but personally, I come from the child's perspective. Prior to my current husband, I didn't have any children, so I didn't really date with kids. But my parents were divorced when I was 2 or just before I turned 2, something like that. I don't even remember, basically. And they both started dating, I mean, as early as I can remember. And so I had to deal with that from a very young mind, from a very little girl, not understanding in the first place why the heck my parents aren't together. So that was like the big thing, right? And still processing and dealing with that, with whatever information I was given. I don't even remember. But I'm dealing with that. And now all of a sudden somebody else comes along that has my daddy's attention or has my mama's attention. And they maybe even come with other kids, and they could be older than me. So they could be experiencing different things, or they could have different rules, right? Or maybe they're younger than me. And so I'm the oldest in the room and I need to know better and all of that stuff. And, the youngsters kind of, as I felt as a child, more attention. She got better time than I did. So there's a lot involved in this.
Yeah.
Let's unpack it. Where do we start?
Yeah, I think there's tons of factors that go into this. But one of the things that came to mind as you were sharing, about your experience is to make sure this is something that I think about in my relationship. I've been in a long-term relationship for almost 10 years and I've been divorced for about 15 years. And my kids notice the way that I treat my kids versus I treat my partner. So like one thing that came to mind for me is that you have to treat your kids as well as you treat your partner.
Gotcha.
And we don't always do that. And so here's an example. What I mean by that is like, let's say my partner and I are sitting on the couch watching TV or something like that. And he's like, oh, he runs out of his drink and he wants another drink, like some water or something like that. And I'm like, oh, let me get up and I'll get you some water. But if my kid and I were sitting on the couch, am I going to be like, go get your own water?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm talking literally like little things like that, where you would go out of your way to sort of cater to your partner, but you're not really doing the same thing for your kids. You're not really going out of your way to cater to them because we don't want to coddle our kids. Right. But we want to just at least be mindful of the amount of effort that we're putting into our partner and the amount of effort we're putting into treating them really well. Versus how much we are showing our kids that we're exasperated and that they're a burden. Like, does that make sense? Like we're often, when our kids ask for something, we sort of are like, you again?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas when we're dating and when we're in a relationship or like, especially a new relationship, we're like so excited to see them and we're, but we're not really showing our kids that same level of affection and connection. And so I think sometimes that unevenness can be problematic.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That definitely hits home back then, right? Because again, in my adult brain, I get it. But being a child, I can see where there could be some friction there. This person isn't my dad, isn't my mom. And now you're paying more attention to them than you are me. And like, I'm yours.
So yeah, and you're happier to see them, right? Like we have to be as happy to see our kids as we are to see our partner.
Right.
And if we're struggling in that arena, if we're struggling to like be happy to see our kids and like show them connection and affection, then we really need to rethink like what's going on in our space and like how much capacity we have. We need our kids come first. They have to be the priority in our capacity, in our ability to care for another person. We can't put more attention on our partner and more capacity to our partner than we have for our kids. And I think that's really hard because sometimes when we're single parenting, we're feeling really burnt out. We're not really feeling validated. We're not really getting the attention that we need. And so we're really excited about that attention. We just have to be mindful. We just have to be mindful of like, what signals are we sending to the kids in that in that arena? Are we really showing them that we have space for them and we have time for them? Are we giving them enough? And I think some of the time we're not. And I don't know that we're doing it on purpose, right? But it's part of something that happens when we're in a relationship is we focus and shift our attention. That person sort of becomes all consuming and we might have a tendency to like make the kids less of a priority.
So let's back up to the beginning. I love that because that kind of plays into this whole introduction part. So the introduction sounds like it would be a good idea to kind of sit down and think about that and think about what that's going to look like when you want to do that, when that makes sense to do, and be really self-aware of how and then how you kind of approach both parties after, right? So that you don't alienate your kid
right.
or vice versa, or, alienate your new partner because you're so focused that you want your kid to have a good transition. And we deal with a lot of things throughout the day and weeks, years. So sometimes it's hard to focus on a lot of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it's important to really think about that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's, it's a real balancing act, right? Because we're trying to divide our attention between two different entities, and we get something different out of each. Like sometimes it's more rewarding to be the member of the relationship than it is to be the single parent.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel that way. My kids are older now. Two of them are adults. And one is near there. And so single parenting isn't quite as hard as it used to be for me today. But when I had little kids, my oldest was only 5 when I got divorced. So I had 3 little kids under the age of 6 when I was divorced, and now single parenting. Like, that's not an incredibly rewarding job. It's not incredibly validating. I had great support around me that helped me feel validated. I had my mom, I had my friends, right? And so that was what fed me. But we don't always have that. And so when we then start dating and we have this partner who's now like treating us well and caring for us, we could fall into that misbalance of caring more about the relationship, right? Like that's that slippery slope. It's because we want to really care for our partner. We want to show them that they're welcome too. Because on the flip side, when you bring a partner into a house with all these kids and your routine and everything like that, the partner might not feel like they're welcome, or they might not feel like they have a place in the house. They might feel alienated in themselves. And so I think establishing a really solid foundation of your relationship is the priority here. Establishing really healthy boundaries, recognizing that as a single parent, you're bringing kids into a relationship. You're not alone in that, and you're not going to have as much alone time. You're not going to have as much, vacation and like this honeymoon phase. Like that just doesn't exist as much in these types of relationships, especially depending on your parenting time agreements with your ex-spouse or ex-partner. So, you want to have a solid foundation in that relationship where both partners understand the obligation and the role of the kids in that adult's life. So I don't know if that takes months. I don't know if that takes weeks. I think it depends on the relationship. But you do want to at least have had some of these discussions. Like, what is it like when the kids are needing something and we're on a date? What is it like if we're trying to watch a movie, but the kids want to cuddle and watch a movie on the couch? And so instead of watching our rom-com, we have to watch Inside Out or whatever, right? Is that okay? And if it's not okay, then what are we talking about? What kind of time are we going to be spending together, right? Is that a relationship where we want to limit the time with the kids and really spend time just by ourselves? Maybe that's a thing that we do, but that needs to be a discussion.
And I suppose it could be case by case, and everybody's different. Everybody's situation is different, right? But how do you feel about having a bit of time to settle into the new relationship, figure each other out, get to understand, confirm if it's actually a thing or not, like before you do the introduction? Do you have any sort of feedback on that or any advice on that?
Yeah, I think for sure you want to establish the relationship. You want to make sure that you guys are kind of going somewhere. You want to make sure that it's at least a level of commitment to where if the kids get excited about that person, then they're not just going to be gone the next day. And you don't want to have this like inconsistent, unpredictable cycle of people in your life, right? So even with friendships before meeting your kids, like you want to make sure that the kids are recognizing that you are the constant and that you are consistently predictable, and that we're only allowing people around our kids who are going to have the kids' safety and best interest in mind. Like we're not spending time with people who aren't going to treat our kids well, or who aren't going to respect the role of the parent and the boundaries and that kind of thing. I guess in my mind, I'm thinking like a few months before you're introducing the kids. I don't know that that's always feasible. it just really depends on the relationship, I think.
Mm-hmm. And then, so this piece was the part that was hard for me. And we were talking about this a little bit before we hopped on. So again, my parents got divorced before I was 2, don't even remember. And they ended up with new partners that had kids.
Yeah.
And that was tough. And from what I remember, so my adult brain is like thinking back now, right? And I understand things a little bit more now, so that's helpful. But when I was a kid, it was hard. I was just a kid. And I was young for, a good couple of years of this.
Mm-hmm.
And there were kids that were older than me, and there were many that were younger than me, mostly younger than me. But it was a difficult spot for me to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And I often felt like, for instance, when my dad and his wife of many, many years ended up buying a home together, they bought a 2-bedroom home. Back east, our floor plans are weird. There's like add-ons and really weird crap because they're like, built in the 1700s.
Right.
And so there were only 2 bedrooms, and quite of course, naturally, her kids that lived with her full time got the bedroom, and I had to sleep on the couch. But I was only there like Friday and Saturday night, every other week or something. So it didn't make sense for her to put her kids in the living room and give me a bedroom, right? Like that just didn't make sense. But in my brain, I was like, okay, so this woman is taking my dad over. And now her 2 little girls are taking my dad over, and there's no place for me.
Mm-hmm.
So in that scenario, I realize that scenario might not be everybody's, but I feel like that could be a common feeling for children that are coming together like that, depending on who lives with who.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. What kids need is they need to be seen, and they need to feel valued. They need to feel like safe and connected with their caregivers. And so when you're bringing in more kids, you're shifting the dynamics, you're shifting the birth order, right? An oldest might become the middle child, the youngest might become the oldest, like an older child. You're not necessarily going to have the same dynamic. You can't keep everything consistent. But what you can do is introduce all the kids and treat them all as equals. Like nobody gets special treatment. Nobody gets special things. Like if the rules in one house, you have to at least try to blend the rules to make it as least common denominator.
Got it. Yeah.
In both places, right? So like if in one house bedtime is at 9:00 and in another house bedtime is at 10:00, well then maybe everybody goes to bed at 9:30, right? Like we have to kind of think through how can we make this equal and equitable at the same time? Because there are going to be differences. There are going to be differences between each, like the kids might have 2 different houses with 2 different sets of rules. And now they have this 3rd set of rules coming in from this other parent. We just have to be mindful of how complicated this is for our kids.
Yeah.
And we want them to feel safe and seen and connected. And if we can do that, and we can say like, you're the priority here, and we're not, changing our routine to cater to the partner, but we're maybe blending the routine to make things seem more stable for the kids, then that's a better way to go about it. And we have to make sure that we're enforcing our boundaries, and that when a kid hurts another kid, there are consequences for that. So like whether that's bullying or just like hurt feelings, or like even like physical hurting them, roughhousing or even violence, there has to be a level of consequence for that. We have to say to our kids, like, we're not going to let anything bad happen to you. And we're going to protect you when something bad does happen. So if the kids start fighting or they don't get along or something like that, we have to acknowledge like, hey, this is really hard on everyone because it's new and because it's different, but there are consequences for the other kids' actions. So there has to be equal discipline throughout all houses.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny that you say that because there were a few of those incidents, and specifically just speaking to that particular relationship. So it was my dad and his partner at the time, and her two girls. I have to tell you, it built some resentment. So there are two girls, they're both younger than me. The older one, we're super tight. We're like peas and carrots. We've been tight our entire lives. I've known her since she was 5 years old, And then the other one, she's younger. There was some resentment built there throughout the years for whatever reason and whatever incident and all the little teas that happened, right, with her, because I was so much older. And honestly, like, I hate to say it, but that resentment has lasted through the years and still today affects us. And we don't have a relationship to this day.
Oh.
And it is a sad thing. And as I think back, I'm like, well, geez, I guess we could probably fix that. So that'll be another show.
Yeah.
But I feel like from a parent's perspective, and I haven't done this, I have not dated with children, but if I were to, that would definitely be something that I would think extra hard on is, okay, these, I want these people to be family forever. Like, we're a family. And what can I do as a parent to, encourage the relationship to be positive and healthy versus, I'm not blaming my dad and his partner by any means. But, I wonder if there could have been some things that they could have interfered with a little bit more to sort of help with that, because it's pretty rocky with her and I.
Yeah, adults need to get involved when the kids are struggling. We can't just ignore that or pretend it's not happening or deny it. Like, if one kid is saying, hey, this other kid did this to me and it really hurt my feelings, we have to acknowledge that, and we have to give them that validation of, like, I hear you and I see you and we're going to address it. And that's not to say like, oh, this kid's going to get grounded for the rest of their life or whatever. Like, it doesn't have to be this huge deal, but what it does have to be is addressed. It can't just be swept under the rug or ignored, or, sometimes parents will say like, oh, they don't understand, or especially when it's younger kids to older kids, like, we put a lot of responsibility on our older kids to take it and not do anything about it when a younger kid like bothers them or hurts them. But we would never do that if that was our only kid and they were that same age. We would address it. We wouldn't just say, oh, well, that other kid who's the same age as you when you're little did this thing and that's okay because they're little. You're little too. Like, no, we would make it stop. And so we have to do that to our older kids too. I think sometimes we forget that our older kids are still kids.
Yeah.
And so like what you're saying, these kids are younger than you. You were probably given a lot of responsibility in that situation.
Very much so. Very much so. I can remember it to this day. I can still hear it in my head. You're bigger, you know better. What do I know better?
Right.
To clam up and not say shit? Like, what do I know better? You know?
Right.
So I think that is a risk. And I'm not saying, don't date with kids and don't date somebody else that has kids. But I feel like when kids are involved, kind of some extra steps that would be really helpful for all involved, because, I'm sure that her mom and my dad wish things were different between us. I'm sure it hurts them that this is the way it is.
Yeah, every parent wants their kids to be happy and healthy and safe. Nobody's struggling because they're just don't care about their kids. We're struggling because we don't necessarily know what's going on with our kids, or we don't necessarily know what's affecting them, or we don't necessarily know how to change it. I think it's really important to consider the mind of a child is not the mind of a small adult.
Right.
Kids are not just smaller adults. They're little, and their minds are not fully developed. They don't have the context and the information that we have when we say something's not a big deal. To them, it is a big deal. And so what we want to do is acknowledge, like, hey, I hear you. That must have been really hard when that happened. Can you tell me more about what happened so that I can talk to that person, or I can talk to, we can have a family meeting, or we can address this and make sure that you guys are all safe. Because everyone deserves to be safe. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. And is there a little bit of, and I'm going to try and articulate this, Laura, so it makes sense. But you know how you always say babies are, their biggest thing is they need to stay alive, and they're kind of self-focused, right?
Mhm.
Because what else do they know, right?
Yeah.
They need to keep themselves alive, and they attach to the person that helps them do that. Like I assume that kind of weans off, right?
Mhm.
But you're still continuing to be self-focused as a child, right? So it's tough. And I'm thinking back to when I was told, you're older, you should know better.
Mm-hmm.
It was hard for me to understand what my little sister was going through, or where she was at, or what she was dealing with. And I was really focused on what was going on with me. And I felt abandoned because that focus didn't get attention.
Yeah, you still need the attachment from your caregivers. Like, even when you're older, you still need to be parented. You still need to be led, and you still need to have a calm, confident leader who's supporting you and who's giving you what you need. And so sometimes when we're the oldest child, we are basically shifting away from being parented and sort of being shifted into an on your own kind of way. And that's not okay. We have to still connect with and attune to our kids, no matter how old they are. And the more kids we have, the harder that can be, because, well, there's so many of them, and there's like competing needs. But we really need to do a good job of connecting with each one of our kids every day, and connecting with our oldest kids and our middle and our younger kids, and recognizing them for who they are, and still being their parent, still being their leader. While we can give older kids more responsibility, it's not appropriate to give them the responsibility of taking care of their younger siblings, like especially as a primary caregiver for their younger siblings. Like, that's not okay to do. But also just as somebody who is responsible for just taking it, and the younger siblings aren't getting that discipline.
Yeah. It was a tough time. It was a really tough time for me. Little tiny gear shift, sort of, but not really. Another thing that I struggled with, and again, I wish I could go back in time with my adult brain and sit my parents down, right? And be like, yo, what are you guys doing? Or, hey, you did that really great, but can we fix this? How do you navigate discipline when you're coming together as two separate families? So partner maybe has kids, you have kids, you guys are most likely doing things different because you're two different people, right? How do we come together with guiding and with disciplining each other's kids? And what kind of conversation? I mean, I'm assuming that a conversation needs to be had between the two partners before that stuff starts happening. I remember that being huge for me, and me feeling really resentful when one of my parents' partners stepped in and started to act like the parent. I can tell you, I have said, you're not my mother, you're not my father, 100,000 times.
Yeah. I think that's partly par for the course from a kid's perspective, to like maybe not appreciate discipline from another parent. But most of the time, that's going to happen when it's inconsistent. When you have consistent discipline from all parents involved and all caregivers, then we can respect the adults in the house. So when the adults in the house act like adults and are calm, confident leaders, and are supporting the kids in the ways that they need to be supported, then kids tend to respect them. They tend to feel like maybe they don't like their rules. They maybe will act out and they'll rebel, but ultimately there will be more appropriate behavior than inappropriate behavior. What I see a lot of the time is when we lose our temper, when we're inconsistent, when we say we're going to do something, but then we don't do it. So like broken promises, even from a discipline perspective, can really, really, really influence rebellion in a child. So for example, if I tell you that we're not allowed to have our phones after 9 p.m., All the phones go on the charger downstairs. Nobody sleeps with their phones. If that's true for the one kid, that's true for all kids. And then it's 9:30 and I'm not taking my kid's phone, but the other parent is taking the other kid's phones or something like that, right? Like then now we have a rift. And now we have resentment building and now we have a problem. And then now maybe we have a problem between the adults because the adults weren't quite on the same page. So that can be confusing. So even though the kid doesn't want you to take their phone at 9:00 and they begged you to keep it until 9:30 or whatever, you have to still take their phone at 9:00. You have to do it because you said you were going to do it. And they deserve to have a parent that's predictable and safe and consistent. So they know what matters and they know how to navigate the rules and be successful in the house. And so if we're inconsistent, if we're saying, hey, you know, depending on your behavior, you can have this or you cannot have this, that can be a really slippery slope because behavior is subjective and each parent is going to be different. And depending on how tired that parent is, they may or may not enforce what they said. And so we have to support each other and create these boundaries and rules, create as few rigid rules as possible. But when you create them, you enforce them, right? So like structurally, we want things to be sound. We want there to be expectations for chores. Everyone has the same expectations and the same consequences. We want there to be expectations for screen time. Everyone has the same expectations and the same consequences. And that can vary by age, right? So if maybe your middle schooler doesn't get to have their phone, or maybe they don't have a phone at all. Maybe your older kids have their phones until 10:00 or something like that. I don't know, whatever. But like that can be, but it has to be reasonable. It has to be explained. It has to be explicit. It can't just be off the cuff. You don't want to discipline, and these are not game time decisions. These are plays that you've written out. You guys are the coaches, right? So you've got to write out the plays and know when to execute them. And then give the kids enough autonomy in between to be able to make their own choices. So you want to have some structure in there and boundaries and consistent enforcement of that structure and boundaries. But you also want to let the kids be able to like have some autonomy and make their own choices when it comes to, you know, maybe they have a chore, you know, maybe they have 3 chores that they're responsible for and they can choose which one they do that day and or something like that, right? Like, so you want to have some decisions that are kid-sized decisions, but overall the grown-ups make the decisions on the big stuff.
I really love that you said that, because what I have heard throughout the years or seen throughout the years in some cases is you discipline your kids and I'll discipline mine. And I'm like, ooh, yikes. That's definitely resentment waiting to happen, because you know one of them is going to be more lenient than the other one.
Yeah, and it's not really modeling any kind of consistent predictability, right? Like that's not predictably safe for the kid.
No.
Kids need predictability. They need to know what to expect.
Yeah.
And if you respect your partner and your partner respects you, you guys can come together to compromise on some relatively acceptable standards. Right? And if you don't respect your partner from the perspective of, I don't think that they can be in charge of my kids, then you need to rethink your partnership. Bottom line. If you don't think that your partner is a safe person to have around your kids, then that's not okay.
Yeah. Definitely a red flag. Definitely.
Yeah.
And that is actually a potential topic for another episode that we've talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we want to make sure that we're setting the example for our kids that relationships are safe and healthy. And if I'm saying, oh, this person isn't allowed to discipline my kid, I'm basically tying their hands when I'm not around.
Right. And there will be a time when you're not around.
Right. And the kids will know that. And then that's when we get, well, you're not my mom or you're not my dad. Because I'm reinforcing that as the adult, saying, well, they're not your parent, so they can't discipline you. That's absolutely an unhealthy position.
Yeah. And then from the kid's perspective, the fairness thing,
Mm-hmm.
And
Respect.
now I'm pissed at her kids, and it's not even their fault.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm taking it
It's
out
not
on
the kid's
them.
fault.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not the kid's fault. And so what we have to do is we have to act like the adults. And that's I'm telling you from my own experience, that's a really hard thing to do all the time, to maintain the adult self in the room without getting triggered into feeling like you're a teenager, or feeling like you're helpless, or feeling like you're your kid's peer and you're end up getting into an argument with one of your kids as if you're not in charge. Right? Like,
Right.
sometimes we forget that we are the ones in control. Like, we are the ones that have the authority here, and we can stop and walk away. Like, we don't have to just be the bigger person. We are literally and figuratively the bigger person in this situation, and we need to act like it and not put that responsibility on them.
So it's probably a great idea for everybody, no matter who you are. We say this all the time, to maybe get some counseling for yourself before you enter into another relationship with kids and the other person has kids, huh?
Yeah, I thought you might say that. I do think that is that's a great idea. I think some some co-parenting guidelines, which I'm building a course for that, for people who are second families, first families, extended families. Like, co-parenting with your kid's other actual parent is hard when you're married, just as much as it is when you're separated and when you're having a step parent involved or another relationship, right? So co-parenting is co-parenting. Two adults are not always often on the same page.
Right.
And so we have to, like, step outside of ourselves and have that conversation. Like, what do you think should be the rules around here? Are you concerned about screen time? Are you concerned about chores? Are you concerned about school? What are those expectations, and how are we going to handle it?
Mm-hmm. Lots of conversations. And there's so many conversations to be had when you get into a new relationship anyway. Now throw kids in the mix, right?
I know.
Well, and so it makes sense that it takes, or could take, several months before you get to that point of introduction, because there's a lot of learning, a lot of establishing to happen before you bring the kids into the mix. And personally, I got to tell you, like, I almost feel like you have, and this is probably not true, but I almost feel like you only have one shot at it. Like, first impression is everything. And, I'm just thinking back to my child brain. I didn't really give them much of a shot after that.
Right. Right.
No? Like,
and we want to prepare our kids for that. Right? We want to prepare our kids and say, hey, we are going to, like, if I'm dating somebody, I might tell my kids, like, I'm seeing someone, and, eventually maybe, like, we'll be able to meet them. But right now, I'm just going to get to know them to make sure that they're a safe person for you. And that way, it's not like this complete surprise, like, oh, surprise, we're moving in together. Like, we've never met. Like, you don't want it to be like that drastic either. You want to kind of let your kids know ahead of time, hey, I'm seeing somebody. And so when adults go on dates, they are getting to know each other. And right. So we're, like, teaching them that dating is a normal thing, and we don't always date the same people. We don't always stay, just because we've gone on one date doesn't mean we're going to go on more dates. Mm-hmm. Just introducing the kids to the concept that you might enter into another relationship, and that doesn't threaten your relationship with the kid, is really important. To kind of say, this is not going to threaten your relationship with me. I'm always your mom, and your dad's always your dad, or your other mom's always your other mom, or whatever, right? Like, your parents are always your parents, no matter what. And we're never going to not be. We're always going to be there for you. And this other person is here to add to that, not to take away from it.
I think I'm so glad that you said that, because I think that's such a giant conversation that I would have really benefited from. And again, age appropriate use of words here, right? Because I was very young. I told you my parents got divorced when I was 2 or just before. And so I had a very young experience with this, or a very happened quickly in my life, like, and I remember I would hide my mom's car keys so she couldn't leave.
Oh.
Like the babysitter would come over, and I'd be like, "Where are you going?" "I'm going on a date." Okay, well, try and find your car keys. I remember doing that because I didn't I didn't want her to go, and I felt like
Yeah.
this other person was taking her away from me.
Mhm.
And I don't remember, again, I was little, so I don't remember if there were any conversations around that. I don't think so, but then again, I can't really say that for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, we need to treat our kids with respect and dignity and recognize that they're human beings. They're separate from us and they can't just go with the flow. They don't know what's happening. We have to tell them. And we can tell them in an appropriate way. We can say like, "Hey, I'm going on a date. I'm meeting a new friend."
Hmm.
Right? Or I'm going out with another grown up. And that's a grown up to do and that's an okay, normal, healthy thing to do. And I love you and
Hmm.
I'll be back in a couple of hours or whatever. We need to make
Hmm.
sure that we're including our kids in the process of like adults have adult lives and
Hmm.
kids have kid lives and there's nothing bad about that.
Hmm.
Even if it's hard, it's still okay to do.
Yeah, communicate, 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 right? That's what I'm hearing. I mean, that's what I'm
Yeah.
hearing really throughout the entire show. I and I know because this is what you do, but I just feel like that is so important that we don't just assume our kids get it.
Hmm. Yeah. And we can allow them to have hard feelings about it. We can allow them to be sad or to be confused. And we can say, like, I understand that this is hard, and I get like this must be a hard and confusing thing. And I'm going to make it as easy as possible. And I'm going to be here for you. And I'm going to continue to talk to you and love you and show up for you no matter what.
Hmm.
Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's bad.
Right, right.
And we need to be able to tell our kids that and let them be sad. And, we can't give them the choice of us dating.
I think that is a trap that some parents fall into.
We can't do that. We can't say, is it okay with you if I go out on a date? No, that's not their choice. They have no control over that. That's not on them. That's too much responsibility for them.
Hmm.
So we have to
Absolutely.
make kid-sized decisions are kid-sized decisions that they can actually control and that they can actually have a say in and that we can actually agree to. We can't give a kid a choice that they don't really have. Like
Right.
if I say, are you ready for mom? Like, are you ready to meet them? Do you want to meet them? Like, no, you make that call. That's on you, the adult.
Well, because what if they say no? Then what do you do?
Exactly. Then what are you going to do?
Then just force them?
Right. That's not okay.
No.
Or what, you're going to just put it on hold until your kid decides whether or not you're ready to meet this other person? Like, no, you are the adult and you need to make that call and you need to live with the choice that you make.
Yeah.
And that's you do that the best way that you can by planning ahead, by having important conversations, by preparing the child to meet this person, by recognizing that it's going to be difficult and there are going to be some hurt feelings sometimes. And that's okay because families are resilient and that people can repair those ruptures. When we make a mistake and we say, you know what, I'm really sorry that you felt left out the other day when we were watching a movie. I'm really sorry that you felt that way. That's not my intention. How about you and me watch a movie together tonight?
Yeah.
Right? Oh, okay. Kids are usually pretty shocked when adults apologize.
Yeah.
But we need to apologize when we make a mistake, and we're going to make mistakes.
And I feel like that's such a good learning time for them too, because as human beings, they're going to make mistakes throughout their life. And the earlier that they're exposed to, hey, I made a mistake, I'm going to take responsibility for it and apologize and do the things that I need to do to, get back, then I think that's a great lesson, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
what better to learn
exactly.
it from than from mom or dad?
Well, that's exactly right. In relationships, it's not reasonable to expect that we don't hurt each other's feelings sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
My feelings will get hurt in this relationship. Your feelings will get hurt in this relationship. That is a fact. There's no way around it. And so when we can know that that's okay and that we didn't mean to hurt each other's feelings, because most of the time we're doing everything we can not to hurt each other's feelings, but mistakes happen, we can forgive each other. We can be humble and we can say, I'm so sorry that happened. I really made a mistake. I wasn't being considerate of your feelings. I wish that I handled that differently. Move on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we teach our kids to apologize and repair in relationships, then we're teaching them how to maintain healthy relationships instead of either all or nothing thinking like, oh, well, this person did something wrong, so I'm out.
Right.
Like, that's not real life.
And what a giant tool. Like, think about how many times in life, just us in our young age, that we have been through incidents where that training has been really helpful, right? Where knowing how to navigate potential little issues like that and still maintain that relationship and still honor ourselves and honor the other person. It's giant. I think it's such a giant life lesson, as many are when our kids are little, right?
Yeah, it's so important. And it teaches them how to do that with each other too. And it teaches them how to accept apologies. It teaches them how to recognize that it's okay that they can get hurt and they can recover from that. And that it's not the end of the world if they get their feelings hurt or if something bad happens. Because I think sometimes it's like the end of the world. We don't know what to do with that.
Right. Right.
And I think it's really important that we are calm and that we are thoughtful and that we are mindful when we're thinking about introducing a new person to our kids or changing the dynamic of our household or our family. We just have to think it through. We just have to be mindful. I'm not saying there's a perfect way or there's everything, you're not going to do everything right or everything wrong. But we want to consider that the kids are human beings. They're separate from us and they have considerations that we need to make in order to make this easy and safe for them.
Absolutely. So we've shared a lot of value here. And I have been so into this conversation with you that I hadn't checked comments in a bit. Yeah. And so we have some comments and we have Crystal on with us. Thank you so much, Crystal, for being here. And this has come at the perfect time for her. And I'll let you read through those comments when we get off, because I'm sure you'll want to respond to her on some of these things. But she put some comments out there. And I love when we have a topic that really hits for our people. And I love when it hits at that right moment for our people. So I appreciate you following, Crystal. Thank you so much for being here with us. And I'm glad that this was helpful for you. Is there anything else that you would like to add, personal counselor Laura, before we go?
Maybe I was thinking of something else. I was just thinking about respecting the other person's partner. Like, we haven't really talked a lot about that.
That we need to do that one.
But just to kind of put this out there, the best case scenario is that a kid has a healthy relationship with all parents. And that means a healthy relationship with the partner's partner, with the ex-partner's partner, right? And so when we undermine that, we're really, really priming resentment and confusion and disrespect and difficulties for that child. That child might really like the other partner's spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend. And we need to prepare ourselves for that to be okay. And I'll tell you one thing that's really hard as a human is listening to your kids get excited about your ex's new love interest. And to be compared to that person. Like, I remember, and we've talked about this on the show before. I know my son would tell me about how great of a time they had and all the different things that that their stepmom does and that I don't do. And I'm, at this point in my life, I've had enough therapy where I'm like, good for that. That sounds awesome. I love that.
Could you do that for me too?
I love that for you. What a great time.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say, like, that's got to sting when the first time you hear something like that, when the kid loves the other person. And so we have to be ready for that and be able to say, like, I love that that's you're having a great environment and a great experience, because it's really critical that the kids know that it's safe to love that person.
Yeah. I think that is giant. And I am so glad that you said that, because, obviously it plays into this topic too. But it also creates a topic for another show. So that's probably going to be coming here in the future. But I think that is absolutely giant. And, it could be especially triggering if you didn't want the relationship to end.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I think that is huge. And I loved what you said about it's not easy to do this all the time, but we have to remain that calm, cool, collected adult, right?
Yeah.
No matter what's going on.
That's exactly right. That means putting the kid's mind first. That means protecting the child above all else and not letting your hurt feelings interfere with your ability to help your child have safe relationships with the adults in their life.
Yeah.
It's hard to do.
Really hard to do, but very fulfilling for them. Because if we can make it all work, they just went from having 2 loving adults to 4.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right, guys, if you want some more awesomeness, hop on over to our YouTube channel. It is at Mom Nation USA. That's our handle. Do a little scrolly down till you see the yellow playlist, and that is the mental wealth playlist. We have a bunch. I think we have 37 videos on there right now.
Yes, so go watch them all.
Watch them all. You can binge Katie and Laura all weekend long. Okay.
Yeah.
If you prefer the podcast style, maybe you like to get out there and move your body, do some hiking. It's a little warm if you're in Arizona right now, but maybe at night. Then hop on over to your favorite podcast platform, do a quick search for Mom Nation Talk Radio, and there you can connect with us and all of our episodes. Thank you again, Laura. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thank you so much. It's my favorite day of the month.
Me too. Bye.
Bye.